The morning was cold and the street smelled faintly of wet asphalt and coffee. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself and adjusted the small cardboard sign beside her paintings. Each canvas leaned carefully against the brick wall of the cafe, hoping someone would pause long enough to notice the colors and strokes she had poured her heart into. She had been standing here for hours before the city truly woke up. Her body ached, a mixture of chemotherapy fatigue and the stiff muscles from days spent on her feet. Each breath reminded her that life had become a struggle she had never imagined. She had always loved painting. From the moment she could hold a brush, she had filled sheets of paper, walls of her room, and even furniture with color. Art had been her escape, a world where she could be free and happy, untouched by the harshness outside. But now, it had become more than just an escape. It had become her lifeline. Her cancer treatments were expensive, and the bills kept growing. Rent, utilities, food, and medicine were constant worries that pressed down on her like a weight she could not shake. Some days were harder than others. On mornings like this, when the city seemed cold and unwelcoming, she wondered how she had ended up here. Just months ago, her life had felt normal. She had friends, a small but steady job, and dreams she believed she could reach. The diagnosis changed everything. Doctors' voices had become familiar, almost like an unwelcome chorus reminding her of fragility. The cancer seemed to drain not just her body, but also the future she had imagined for herself. She shifted her position slightly and looked at her paintings. Each one was different. One had splashes of yellow and orange, trying to capture the sunlight she often missed. Another was a soft blend of blues and greens, like a quiet river at dusk. She remembered sitting by a window during one of her treatments, painting the same river she used to visit as a child. It had felt like she was holding on to a fragment of the life she once had. Passers-by walked quickly, their heads down, absorbed in their own lives. Most didn't notice her or her work. A few glanced, nodded politely, and continued on their way. Every small gesture, every coin left in her small basket mattered. It was enough to buy a sandwich or pay for a single treatment. It wasn't much, but it was something. She had learned to survive on tiny bits of kindness and moments of connection, even when the world felt indifferent. By late morning, the sun had risen a little higher, though it did little to warm the chill in her bones. A young man in a suit stopped for a moment, looked at her paintings, and smiled faintly. He didn't buy anything, but he lingered just long enough to make her feel seen. Moments like that gave her a spark of hope. She could almost forget for a second the ache in her chest and the worry about her next appointment. Her stomach growled. She hadn't had much to eat that morning. Some days it was easier to skip meals than to face the harsh reality of money she didn't have. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small granola bar she had saved. It wasn't much, but it was something to keep her energy up for a few more hours. She chewed slowly, savoring each bite, thinking about the life she had before all of this. There were memories of laughter, of quiet afternoons painting with friends, and dreams that seemed to fade too quickly. She tried not to think too hard about the future. Worrying about what might happen only made her feel weaker. A bus rumbled down the street, the noise echoing against the buildings. She watched people climb aboard, disappearing into their own worlds. She wondered what it would be like to live without constant fear, without the ache of uncertainty. Her life had become a series of waiting rooms, medical appointments, and moments like this, standing on the sidewalk hoping someone would care enough to pause. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the noise and cold fade. In that silence, she remembered her father teaching her to paint when she was just a girl. He had believed in her talent, even when she doubted herself. Those memories made her feel a pang of both joy and sadness. He had passed away years ago, and now she felt alone in ways she hadn't before. But painting still connected her to him, to the life she had known, and to the person she had once been. She held on to that connection tightly. Hours passed slowly. A few coins clinked into her basket here and there. People complimented her work, saying they loved the colors or the emotion in the strokes. Most moved on, leaving her standing with the quiet sound of the city around her. She learned to find small victories in these moments. Each compliment, each coin, each smile was a tiny miracle, keeping her going just a little longer. By midday, she felt her energy slipping. The chemotherapy made her body feel heavy, her limbs aching like lead. She wanted to sit, to rest, but she knew she couldn't. The small bit of money she earned today might make the difference between eating a meal tonight or going hungry. She forced herself to adjust the sign, straighten the paintings, and smile at anyone who glanced her way. Even when she felt invisible, she tried to show the world that she was still here, still fighting, still creating. A mother and her child passed by. The little boy pointed at one of the paintings, his eyes wide. She smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. The boy tugged at his mother's hand, and they stopped to look. The mother nodded, bought a small painting, and thanked her. That brief interaction made her chest feel a little lighter. It reminded her why she continued, why she painted despite the exhaustion, the pain, and the uncertainty. She remembered the nights she spent in the hospital, the lonely hours staring at the ceiling after treatments. She had thought about giving up many times, about letting life take its course without resistance. But something inside her refused. Painting had become more than survival. It was her rebellion against despair. Each brushstroke was a statement. She existed, she mattered, and she would not disappear quietly. By late afternoon, the crowd thinned. The city seemed to slow. The harsh noises softened. She wiped sweat and tears from her face, though she tried to hide them from the few remaining passers-by. Her body ached in every joint, but her spirit, fragile as it was, held on. She reminded herself that tomorrow was another day, another chance to create, another chance to survive. As the sun began to dip behind the buildings, she packed up her paintings slowly. The streets were emptying, and a chill ran through her again. She thought about the treatments she would face tomorrow, the uncertainty that waited. But she also thought about the small miracles of today. The boy who loved her painting, the kind words of strangers, the coins that might pay for food or medicine. Each small thing mattered. Each small gesture was a lifeline. She walked back to her small apartment, feeling every step in her aching body. But she held her head high, reminding herself that she had survived another day. Painting had kept her going, had kept hope alive in a world that often seemed indifferent, and even in her exhaustion, even in the quiet fear of what tomorrow might bring, she knew she would pick up her brushes again. She would continue to create, continue to fight, and continue to hope, because art had become her life and her lifeline, and she would not let it go. The next morning she woke up before dawn, the apartment cold and quiet around her. She lay in bed for a moment, letting her body rest, though she knew the day ahead would demand every ounce of strength she had. The chemotherapy left her weak, sometimes dizzy, and often with a deep exhaustion that sleep alone could not fix. Still, she forced herself to rise, to eat a small breakfast, and to gather her paintings for another day on the streets. She moved slowly, her hands shaking as she picked up the canvases. Some were her favorites, pieces that had taken days to complete, and she handled them as carefully as if they were fragile pieces of her heart. She remembered nights spent in pain, painting under dim lights in her apartment, her body begging for rest but her mind unable to stop creating. Every brushstroke had been an act of defiance, a refusal to surrender to fear and illness. By the time she reached the corner where she usually sold her art, the city was stirring. People hurried past, faces fixed in determination or distraction, oblivious to the woman and her bright canvases leaning against the wall. She arranged them with care, adjusting colors, straightening corners, and placing a small sign that read, "Original art for a small donation." She hoped someone would pause today, hoped that maybe today would be different. Hours passed with very little attention. Most people didn't even glance at her work. She stood for what felt like forever, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, feeling the familiar ache in her back and legs. Her fingers were stiff from the cold and the weakness that chemotherapy brought. She forced a smile at anyone who looked, though often the glance was fleeting, lost in the rush of commuters and busy shoppers. The city moved quickly, and she felt like she existed in a slow bubble, invisible to most of the world. She remembered a gallery she had once visited as a teenager, filled with people admiring paintings and sculptures. The thought made her stomach ache. Her work deserved to be seen, but the harshness of her reality meant she often had to settle for a few coins from strangers who barely noticed her. The contrast between her dreams and her life was painful, yet she clung to the hope that one day it would change. A man walked by, briefly looking at her paintings before moving on. A child tugged at a parent's sleeve, pointing at the colors, and she smiled as they lingered long enough for her to see joy in their eyes. Those small moments gave her strength. They were fleeting, but they reminded her why she continued despite the exhaustion and the pain. Even if only one person appreciated her work, it mattered. Even one smile could keep her going. She felt the hunger gnawing at her, the emptiness in her stomach growing with every passing hour. Some days she had nothing to eat until the very end of her shift. Today, she had managed to bring a small piece of bread she had saved. She ate it slowly, savoring the flavor, feeling grateful for even that tiny morsel. Survival had become a series of small victories, and she held on to each one tightly. Her mind wandered as she watched the people move past. She thought about her childhood, the days she spent drawing in notebooks and on scraps of paper. Her father had always encouraged her, telling her that her art had the power to touch people. He had passed away years ago, and now she painted alone, but she carried his words in her heart. Painting was not just a skill. It was a lifeline, a way to express herself and hold on to something good in the world. By late morning, she began to tire, but she couldn't stop. There were bills to pay, food to buy, and treatments to consider. Every coin she earned mattered, even if it barely covered a single meal or part of a medical bill. She adjusted her paintings again, trying to make them more inviting, more noticeable to those rushing by. She hoped that someone would stop, that someone would see her talent and care enough to give her a chance. A woman approached, examining one of the paintings closely. She smiled politely, asking questions about the colors and the story behind the piece. She explained softly, her voice a little shaky from exhaustion, how the painting represented a river she loved as a child, a place of peace and memory. The woman nodded, buying the painting, and left with a kind word of encouragement. It was a small interaction, but it filled her with a sense of purpose and reminded her why she kept going. She felt a mixture of hope and sadness. The hope came from the brief moments of human connection, the smiles and gestures that told her she was not completely invisible. The sadness came from the realization that these moments were rare, that most people passed by without noticing the struggle behind the paintings. She tried not to dwell on it too long, focusing instead on what she could control, creating, showing her work, and surviving another day. The afternoon wore on, and the streets became busier. She noticed a few regular faces who stopped to admire her paintings, offering small encouragements. Some bought her work, while others simply paused to appreciate the colors and emotion she had poured into each piece. She smiled at every interaction, even the brief ones, knowing that each was a small thread connecting her to the world beyond her illness and pain. Her body ached in every joint, her hands trembled, and the fatigue weighed heavily on her, but she refused to give up. She straightened a painting, took a deep breath, and reminded herself that she had survived worse days. Each day she made it through was a victory. Each coin earned, each smile received, each brief moment of recognition was a reminder that she mattered. As the sun began to lower, the light shifted across the street, casting long shadows and warming her face slightly. The city slowed and the noises softened. She felt a small sense of relief, knowing she had made it through another day. She packed up her paintings carefully, checking each canvas for damage. Her back and legs ached, but there was a quiet pride in her persistence. Walking back to her apartment, she thought about the day's interactions. She felt both weary and grateful. Every person who had noticed her work, every coin that had been given, every kind word spoken had added to a small reservoir of hope within her. She reminded herself that tomorrow was another day, another chance to share her art, another chance to survive. The apartment was cold when she arrived, but she didn't mind. She hung her coat and set the paintings in a safe corner, arranging them as if they were old friends. She made a small meal, eating slowly, savoring the warmth and nourishment. Even in her fatigue, she allowed herself a moment of gratitude for the day, for the moments of human connection, and for the small victories that kept her going. She sat by the window looking out at the city lights. It was a quiet, reflective time, a moment to breathe and let herself feel everything she had experienced today. She thought about the people who had stopped, the few who had appreciated her work, and she felt a flicker of hope. She reminded herself that every day she continued to paint, every day she continued to fight, was a day closer to survival and perhaps even a brighter future. As night settled, she lay down to rest, her body heavy but her spirit determined. Painting had carried her through countless hard days, and she knew it would continue to be her anchor. She closed her eyes, holding on to the hope that the next day, someone might pause long enough to see her not just as a woman selling paintings, but as a person full of talent, dreams, and the will to survive. The morning light filtered softly through the window, bringing with it a quiet hope that today might be different. She stretched carefully, her body sore from chemotherapy and the long hours spent selling her paintings. Every step was a reminder of her fragility, yet she forced herself to rise, to eat, and to prepare for another day on the street. Each painting she carried felt heavier today, not just because of their weight, but because they carried her dreams, her fears, and her hope. As she arrived at the familiar corner, she noticed the city moving as usual, fast and indifferent. People walked past her quickly, heads down, immersed in their own lives. She set up her small stand, arranging the paintings so that the colors caught the light just right. She hoped that anyone might pause today. Every day was a struggle, but each day also held the possibility of change, however small. Hours passed in the usual rhythm. Most people ignored her work, but a few stopped, admiring the colors, asking questions, offering small encouragements. Each interaction reminded her that her art mattered, even if just to one person. She smiled and spoke softly, hiding the exhaustion and pain, determined to maintain a sense of normalcy and pride. The city grew busier as the morning turned to afternoon. The streets were filled with workers, parents, and children, all moving with purpose. She watched the faces passing by, wondering who might see her, who might care enough to connect with her work. She felt a mix of hope and anxiety, the fear that another day might pass without any meaningful interaction pressing at the edges of her thoughts. Then he appeared. A man walking quickly but with a kind, observant air, approached the corner where her paintings were displayed. He had a child with him, holding the boy's small hand as they navigated the crowded sidewalk. Something about his presence made her heart lift slightly, though she could not explain why. Perhaps it was the way he looked at the world with a calm patience, noticing details others overlooked. He stopped, not just glancing but truly observing her paintings. His eyes lingered over the brushstrokes, the colors, the emotion captured in each canvas. He asked questions not in a hurried or dismissive tone, but with genuine curiosity. He wanted to understand the story behind the art, the life that had brought these pieces into existence. She told him softly, her voice trembling slightly from the combination of fatigue and hope. She explained how each painting held pieces of her past, her memories, and her attempts to find peace in a world that often felt harsh and unwelcoming. His child, curious and wide-eyed, tugged gently at his sleeve, pointing to a bright painting filled with yellows and oranges. The father smiled, asking her about the colors and the feeling behind the painting. She explained that it represented sunlight, a moment of warmth in the midst of her illness, a reminder of better days she hoped to return to. The man nodded, listening carefully as though each word she spoke mattered deeply to him. The encounter lasted longer than most she had experienced. He didn't just glance and move on. He engaged with her, asked questions, and made her feel seen. It was a sensation she had not felt in a long time. Her heart lifted with a cautious hope, a fragile feeling she had almost forgotten. For a brief moment, she forgot the fatigue, the hunger, and the ache in her body. She was no longer just a woman on the street. She was an artist, a storyteller, and someone whose life mattered. The father bought a painting, handing her more than she expected. His generosity was not only financial but emotional. He recognized her talent and effort, acknowledging her struggle with a warmth and kindness she hadn't felt in months. She thanked him, tears brimming in her eyes, unsure whether they came from relief, gratitude, or the sudden surge of hope she felt. His child held the purchased painting carefully, looking up at her with wide admiration, and she felt a small sense of joy she had almost forgotten. They stayed for a few more minutes, talking quietly, the child's small presence adding a gentle light to the encounter. The man asked about her life, how she managed her illness, and what she dreamed of for the future. She spoke honestly, her words soft but filled with emotion, revealing the struggles she had endured and the resilience she had discovered within herself. He listened, genuinely and without judgment, and she felt a connection that went beyond the transaction of selling art. As they prepared to leave, he made a promise, not in words but in the quiet gesture of care, that he would help in any way he could. He would not just buy a painting, he would find ways to support her, to ensure that her talent and courage did not go unnoticed. She felt a surge of hope, a fragile but powerful feeling that perhaps her life could change, that her struggles could be met with kindness and opportunity. The father and child walked away, leaving her standing among her paintings, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and elation. She realized that this single encounter might alter the course of her life. The day no longer seemed ordinary. It was filled with possibility, a sense of connection, and a reminder that even in the darkest times, human kindness could appear unexpectedly. She stayed for a while, watching them disappear into the crowd, her mind racing with hope and gratitude. Her body ached and the fatigue of the day pressed down on her, but her spirit felt lighter. She rearranged her remaining paintings, her hands trembling slightly, not from weakness alone but from the emotional weight of the encounter. Every brushstroke she had created now felt seen, appreciated, and valued. The afternoon wore on, and the city moved with its usual pace. People passed, some pausing briefly to admire her paintings, others ignoring her entirely. But she no longer felt invisible. The encounter with the man and his child had reminded her that there were people who noticed, who cared, and who could make a difference. It was a realization that filled her with quiet determination to continue, to paint and to survive, no matter how difficult the days ahead might be. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, she packed her paintings carefully, her hands steady despite the aches. She walked home slowly, carrying not just her canvases but a renewed sense of hope. The city's noises faded into the background as she reflected on the day, the encounter, and the possibility of change. She knew the path ahead would still be challenging, filled with uncertainty and struggle, but she also knew that she was not alone. The evening brought a calm that contrasted with the chaos of the streets. She prepared a small meal, eating slowly and thinking about the promise of support she had received. Even in the quiet of her apartment, she felt a connection to the world outside, a reminder that life could be unexpectedly kind. She set her remaining paintings carefully, arranging them as if they were a testament to her perseverance and resilience. As she lay down to rest, she allowed herself a moment to breathe and reflect. The day had been long, filled with the usual challenges, but it had also been marked by a miracle, a human connection that reminded her of her worth and her talent. She closed her eyes, holding on to the hope that tomorrow might bring more opportunities, more recognition, and more moments of genuine human kindness. The encounter with the father and child had ignited a spark, and she was determined to keep that spark alive, painting through the pain and creating a path toward survival, hope, and perhaps even happiness. The next few days passed with a strange mix of hope and nervous anticipation. She continued to set up her paintings on the corner, but the encounter with the man and his child lingered in her mind. Every passerby now seemed to carry the possibility of change, though she tried not to get her hopes too high. Her body was still weak and the chemotherapy continued to drain her energy, but her spirit felt lighter. She painted with more intention, each stroke filled with both her struggle and the fragile hope that someone might notice and care. Then, unexpectedly, he returned. The same man walked up the street holding his child's hand, stopping at her corner. His eyes scanned the paintings, lingering longer on a few, and he spoke with the same genuine curiosity as before. The boy smiled shyly, recognizing the work he had seen days ago. She felt a surge of emotion, the kind that makes the heart ache with both relief and joy. This time he wasn't just passing by. He was here for her, and that simple fact made the world feel less lonely. He asked about her situation in more detail, how she managed her treatments, and how she coped with the daily challenges. She spoke quietly, her voice soft but steady, explaining the difficulties of surviving with cancer, the weight of medical bills, and the uncertainty that clouded every day. He listened without interruption, nodding thoughtfully, showing a kind of patience and understanding that she had almost forgotten existed. The boy tugged gently at his father's sleeve, reminding him to be gentle with her, and she smiled at the child, grateful for the small human touch in the midst of her struggle. He offered help, not just in words, but by actively connecting her to opportunities. He knew people who appreciated art and wanted to support artists, and he introduced her to local galleries, art communities, and even online platforms where she could showcase her work. At first, she was hesitant, unsure if she was ready to trust anyone again. But his persistence, his quiet kindness, and the sincerity in his eyes convinced her to take a chance. With his support, things began to change slowly. A small local gallery agreed to feature some of her paintings, and a few online collectors expressed interest in purchasing her work. Each small success felt monumental. Her medical bills, which had loomed like an insurmountable mountain, began to ease thanks to both the support from the gallery sales and the connections he helped her make. She began to breathe more freely, though the fear of relapse or setbacks always lingered at the edge of her mind. Her days now had a new rhythm. She still walked the streets to sell paintings, but she also spent time preparing for gallery showcases and photographing her work for online listings. The effort was exhausting, but she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Every brushstroke mattered more than ever, each painting a symbol of her resilience and her fight to survive. She began to see that her art could not only sustain her physically, but could also create a bridge to a life that seemed almost impossible just days before. The father returned frequently, sometimes bringing the child, sometimes alone. He checked on her well-being, offered advice, and shared ideas to help her improve her reach. He was not intrusive, but his quiet support made her feel valued. She had long felt invisible, her struggles unnoticed by the world, but he made her feel seen, and that small recognition had a profound effect on her confidence and hope. One afternoon, the gallery owner contacted her, excited about a potential exhibition of her work. Her heart raced as she prepared the paintings, organizing them meticulously. The day of the exhibition, she felt both nervous and elated. She had never imagined her work being displayed in such a professional setting. Visitors came, admired her art, asked questions, and purchased pieces. Each interaction reminded her that her efforts, her persistence, and her struggles had not been in vain. With every sale, every compliment, and every word of encouragement, she began to feel the weight of her struggles lift, even if only slightly. Her medical bills became more manageable, and she could afford better food and supplements to help her through chemotherapy. The physical and emotional toll of illness remained, but she discovered that hope once planted could grow even in the harshest conditions. The father continued to play a quiet, steady role in her life. He didn't interfere or impose, but his presence reminded her that human kindness could appear in the most unexpected moments. He shared stories of his own struggles, showing her that life could be difficult for anyone, yet it was possible to make a difference in someone else's journey. Through his support, she began to trust again, to open her heart to the possibility that she was not alone and that her talent mattered. Evenings in her apartment became moments of reflection. She painted with a renewed sense of energy, creating pieces that spoke not only of her struggles but also of her resilience and the miraculous encounter that had changed her life. She thought often of the father and child, grateful for the quiet miracle their kindness had brought into her world. Every painting, every brushstroke was a tribute to the new possibilities opening before her. As days turned into weeks, her life transformed in ways she could hardly have imagined. Her art began to sell steadily, her treatments were more manageable, and she felt a renewed connection to the world. The once lonely streets where she had stood for hours now seemed filled with promise. She realized that one person's willingness to notice and act could create a ripple effect, changing not only her circumstances but also her perspective on life. She still faced challenges, still felt the weight of illness and exhaustion, but the despair that had once seemed overwhelming had diminished. Each day she painted, she felt the strength to endure, the courage to hope, and the conviction that her life mattered. She had discovered that resilience and human kindness could create miracles, even in the most unlikely of places. The father visited often, checking in, celebrating her successes and encouraging her to continue pursuing her dreams. Their connection was one of quiet understanding and mutual respect. She had learned to rely not only on her own strength but also on the power of support, the kind that lifts the spirit and transforms the future. Her paintings, once a mere means to survive, had become symbols of hope, courage, and the miraculous ways life could change. She reflected on her journey, realizing that every struggle had led to this moment. The illness, the loneliness, the long hours on the street, all had shaped her into someone who could endure, create, and inspire. She felt gratitude for the Father's presence, for the small gallery, for the strangers who had recognized her talent. Each act of kindness had built upon another, creating a path towards survival, dignity, and new beginnings. As she prepared for the next day, she looked at her paintings with a mixture of pride and hope. Each canvas represented more than her skill. It represented her life, her struggle, and the miraculous impact of human compassion. She knew there would still be difficult days, but she felt ready to face them, armed with the knowledge that even in the darkest times, a single act of kindness could illuminate a path forward. The sunlight came through the window, soft and warm, filling her small apartment with a gentle glow. She stretched, her body still weak from the treatments, but there was a sense of calm she had not felt in months. Her paintings were neatly arranged, each one representing a piece of her journey, a reminder of the struggles she had faced and the miracles that had come into her life. The corner of her apartment where she once sat quietly in despair now felt like a space of possibility and hope. She had grown stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. The support she had received from the Father and his child, along with the connections she had made through galleries and online platforms, had begun to change her life. Her medical bills were manageable, her daily meals were consistent and nourishing, and she had begun to feel a sense of security that had been absent for so long. The city streets where she once stood, struggling to be seen, now held memories of resilience and small victories that reminded her she could endure almost anything. Today, she planned to paint in the park, where the sunlight would illuminate the canvas and the gentle breeze would bring a sense of freedom. She carried her brushes, paints, and canvases carefully, mindful of her strength and energy. Each step was deliberate, a reminder of how far she had come from the days she could barely stand on the cold sidewalk, hoping for a coin or a kind word. She felt gratitude for her journey, even though the memory of pain and struggle lingered at the edges of her mind. In the park, she set up her space under a large tree, the leaves rustling softly above her. People passed by, some pausing to watch her work, others merely glancing before moving on. She smiled at every passerby, not expecting anything in return but appreciating the presence of others as a reminder that she was part of a larger world. Her brushes moved with intention, each stroke carrying emotion, hope, and the quiet strength that had carried her through so many difficult days. As she painted, she noticed familiar faces from the past weeks. The Father and his child appeared, walking slowly along the path, observing her from a distance. She waved, and they approached with warm smiles. The child pointed excitedly at the painting she was working on, and she laughed softly, feeling a lightness in her heart that had been absent for so long. They stopped to talk, the Father asking about her progress, her health, and the new opportunities she had discovered. Their presence was comforting, a reminder that human kindness could transform a life in ways she had never imagined. The exhibition at the gallery had been a success, and her online sales were steady. People appreciated her art not just for its beauty, but for the story behind it, the story of resilience, struggle, and hope. She had begun to receive messages from people inspired by her journey, some sharing their own battles, others simply expressing admiration for her talent and courage. Each message was a small miracle, a connection that reminded her that her efforts were meaningful and that she was making a difference, even in ways she had not expected. She thought often about the days she had spent standing on the street, cold and exhausted, hoping for attention that rarely came. The memory brought tears not from sadness alone, but from the contrast to the life she now lived. She realized how much had changed, how fragile yet resilient life could be, and how the actions of one person could ripple outward, affecting lives in ways that seemed miraculous. The Father's quiet support had been a turning point, and she felt gratitude that ran deep and true. Her days were now a balance of painting, managing her health, and connecting with the small community of people who had come to appreciate her art. She often thought about the power of human connection, how simple acts of kindness could alter the course of a life. The Father's involvement had shown her that even in the darkest times, there were people willing to notice, to care, and to help. She held that lesson close, using it to guide her interactions with others and to inspire her art. One afternoon, she received news that a local school wanted to display her work for a student art project. She was thrilled, imagining children seeing her paintings and understanding the emotion and effort behind each piece. She thought about the boy who had first stopped to admire her work, how his curiosity and interest had been a small but powerful encouragement. The idea that her art could inspire others, especially young minds, filled her with a sense of purpose she had not known in years. The father continued to check in, sharing stories of his own life and encouraging her to keep creating, keep dreaming, and keep believing in her own strength. Their connection was one of quiet mentorship, mutual respect, and genuine care. She had learned to trust him, and through that trust she had discovered the importance of support, guidance, and human kindness. His presence reminded her that miracles were often not grand gestures but small, consistent actions that built hope over time. Evenings were peaceful, filled with painting, reflection, and the simple joys of daily life. She could now afford small treats for herself, and she sometimes prepared meals she had long dreamed of eating. The apartment, once a place of struggle and solitude, had become a sanctuary where she could heal, create, and imagine a future that once seemed impossible. Each painting she completed was a testament to her journey, a visible representation of resilience and the power of hope. She thought about her health, acknowledging the ongoing challenges but also recognizing the progress she had made. The treatments were still difficult, but she faced them with strength, supported by the care of medical professionals, her own determination, and the human connections that had lifted her when she needed it most. Each small improvement in her strength, each day without severe side effects, was a victory, a reason to continue, and a reminder that life, despite its struggles, was worth embracing. Her art continued to reach people, bringing joy, inspiration, and connection. She had received messages from individuals who had been touched by her story, from young artists who found encouragement in her persistence, and from people facing their own battles who drew hope from her resilience. Each interaction reinforced the idea that her life, her struggle, and her art mattered in ways she had never fully imagined when she had stood alone on the cold street. The father and child became a steady presence, checking in, offering encouragement, and celebrating each success with her. Their support had transformed from a single act of kindness into a genuine bond, a connection that brought joy, reassurance, and a sense of belonging. She reflected on the extraordinary power of human empathy and how it could create miracles in everyday life, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. As the days turned into weeks and then months, she continued to paint, to grow stronger, and to embrace life with renewed courage. Her art was no longer just a means of survival. It was a testament to her journey, her resilience, and the transformative impact of kindness. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the father's role in her life, for the small gallery that had given her an opportunity, and for the countless small moments of encouragement that had built the foundation of her renewed hope. She often thought back to the first day she had stood on the street, exhausted and afraid, unsure if she could survive another day. The contrast to her current life was stark and miraculous. The support she had received, the connections she had built, and the successes she had achieved had created a life filled with possibility, hope, and a sense of purpose that had seemed impossible before. She had learned that even in the darkest moments, life could change, and miracles could happen through simple human kindness and persistent effort. One evening, as the sun set and the city grew quiet, she sat by her window, looking at her paintings and reflecting on her journey. She felt peace, a deep and abiding sense of hope, and a recognition of the strength she had discovered within herself. She knew that challenges would continue, that life would still bring difficulties, but she was ready. She had learned to endure, to hope, and to create meaning in every moment. Her art, her resilience, and the kindness of one person had transformed her life, creating a future filled with possibilities she had once thought impossible. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the warmth of the sun fading from the room. Her journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been filled with miracles, hope, and human connection. She knew that as long as she continued to create, to hope, and to embrace the support and kindness of others, her life would continue to grow, heal, and flourish. The paintings around her were more than just art. They were a testament to her strength, her courage, and the extraordinary power of small acts of kindness that could change a life forever. The following morning, she woke with the first rays of sunlight slipping through her curtains. She stretched carefully, mindful of her body's limits, feeling both fatigue from the previous days and a quiet anticipation for what today might bring. Life had changed so much over the past months. From the cold streets where she once tried to sell her paintings for coins, she had moved into a rhythm where her art was recognized, valued, and reaching more people than she had ever imagined. Yet she knew every day would require persistence, patience, and courage. She made a small breakfast, savoring each bite. Food, which had once been a struggle, now felt like a comfort and a sign that she was moving forward. She organized her supplies, carefully selecting which paintings to bring with her to the park. Today she wanted to experiment with new colors, new techniques, exploring ideas she had long kept in her mind. Painting was no longer only about survival. It had become a way to express hope, resilience, and her growing connection to the world. Arriving at the park, she found her usual spot under the large oak tree. The morning was calm, with the sound of leaves rustling gently in the breeze. She began to set up her canvases and paints, feeling a sense of purpose she had not felt in years. As she worked, people began to pass by. Some paused, curious about her art, while others smiled or nodded, acknowledging her presence. Every interaction felt like a thread connecting her to the world, reinforcing the sense that she was no longer invisible. A familiar pair approached, the father and his child. They greeted her warmly, the boy's face lighting up at the sight of the colors on her canvas. She felt a deep warmth in her chest, realizing how much their steady support had become part of her life. The father asked about the new ideas she had been exploring, and she explained the techniques she was trying, the emotions she wanted to capture, and the stories behind each piece. Their interest was genuine, making her feel seen and valued in ways that went far beyond money or recognition. They stayed for a while, watching as she painted. The boy asked questions about the colors, the brushes, and the way she made the strokes seem alive. She explained patiently, realizing that her art could teach more than technique. It could teach resilience, patience, and the courage to create even when life felt uncertain. The father smiled, his eyes showing quiet pride and encouragement. She felt a sense of connection that went deeper than she had expected, a bond that reminded her how much human kindness could change a life. The day passed with a gentle rhythm. People stopped, admired her work, and sometimes purchased paintings. Each interaction, each smile reinforced her sense of purpose and hope. She thought about how far she had come since those early days on the streets, how one encounter had led to connections, opportunities, and a new sense of possibility. Even the smallest gestures, like a kind word, a smile, or a shared story, felt powerful, reminding her that life could change unexpectedly for the better. In the afternoon, she received an email from a local art magazine. They had seen her online work and were interested in featuring her story in some of her paintings. She felt a rush of excitement mixed with nervousness. Her story, her struggle, and her art would reach a wider audience than ever before. She realized that what had once felt impossible, being recognized for her talent, was now becoming a reality. Her heart swelled with a mix of pride, gratitude, and cautious hope. While waiting for the magazine's response, she continued painting, exploring the blend of colors she had been curious about. The sun moved across the sky, casting changing light on her canvases, giving her new perspectives and inspiration. The father and child visited occasionally, offering quiet encouragement and praise. Their presence had become a constant in her life, a reminder that genuine human care could help her navigate challenges and pursue her dreams. Later, she thought about her health. Chemotherapy was still difficult, and her body often reminded her of its fragility, but she had learned to listen, to pace herself, and to recognize the small improvements in her strength. Each day she endured was a victory. Each moment she painted without collapsing, a testament to her determination. She knew the path ahead was not entirely free of struggle, but she had learned resilience in ways she had never imagined. Evening arrived, bringing a soft calm to the park. She packed up her supplies, careful with each canvas, knowing how much they represented. She walked home slowly, savoring the feeling of accomplishment and quiet satisfaction. Her apartment, though small, was now a place of peace and inspiration. She reflected on the journey she had taken, the lonely streets, the cold mornings, the exhausting hours, and how all of that had led to this moment. The support of one person had become a ripple effect, creating opportunities, hope, and a sense of belonging. Back at home, she prepared a simple meal, taking time to enjoy it. She reflected on the day, on the growth she had experienced and on the endless possibilities that lay ahead. Her paintings surrounded her, each a story, a memory, a symbol of resilience and hope. She thought about the people who had supported her, inspired her, and believed in her talent, realizing that kindness and connection had been just as vital to her survival as her own determination. She sat by the window, looking at the fading light and thinking about the journey ahead. There were still challenges to face, treatments to endure, and moments of uncertainty. But she now faced them with strength, courage, and a sense of purpose that had been absent before. Her art, her resilience, and the support she had received gave her confidence to embrace life, to continue creating, and to find joy in each small moment. As she prepared for sleep, she reflected on the miracle that had started it all, the day the father and his child had stopped to truly see her. That encounter had set in motion a series of events that transformed her life, teaching her the power of human connection, kindness, and hope. She realized that every brushstroke, every smile, and every act of support mattered, and that her journey was not just about survival, but about creating a life filled with meaning, beauty, and possibility. She closed her eyes, feeling a quiet peace and anticipation for tomorrow. Her life was still a work in progress, but she had discovered that she was stronger than she had ever known, capable of enduring, creating, and embracing hope. With her art as both expression and lifeline, she faced the future with courage, knowing that the kindness of one person could ignite a chain of miracles, changing a life forever.